Emily worked at one of the best hospitals in the city. She was a surgeon. It was her dream. Her mother didn't approve of her daughter, spending her life cutting into human bodies, but saving lives was a noble mission. Emily was a fragile and calm girl. She could have been a neurologist, an ophthalmologist, or a therapist, but she firmly said, "No, I want to operate on people." During her time at the hospital, she showed her best side, and the management already trusted her with complex surgeries. She was often called in on weekends and holidays. "Honey, if you keep dedicating all your time to work, you'll never get married," her mother would say. "Mom, marriage isn't the main goal in life," Emily would reply. "Are you crazy? You're a woman, and you know women age faster. Time is passing, the clock is ticking," her mother insisted. "Then let the clock take me," Emily responded indifferently. The last time she was in a relationship was in college. She had fallen in love with a classmate, but he cheated on her with her best friend. Since then, Emily distanced herself from friends, so she wouldn't have to endure that pain again. Despite this, she was beautiful. Blonde curls, porcelain white skin, brown eyes. She looked like a doll, but this doll had a steel character. Her profession was taking its toll. That night, Emily had already left the hospital. It had been a long day, 2 scheduled surgeries in the morning, and then she operated on a man after a car accident for several hours. Now his life was no longer in danger, but she was exhausted. She walked along the hospital park sidewalk, wishing she could get to her apartment, which she shared with her mother, take off her boots and coat, and go straight to the bathtub. There, she would spend an entire hour in the snow-white tub, soaking in blackberry-scented foam. Then, she would go to bed and fall into a deep sleep. Suddenly, she heard a heavy groan. Emily stopped and looked around, perplexed. It was getting dark, and it was very cold that night. Emily shivered and looked toward the nearby bushes, which seemed to be where the groans were coming from. "Who's there?" she asked loudly and boldly. She walked toward the large bush, turning on the flashlight on her phone. The next moment, she saw a man lying in the bush, writhing in pain, gasping, trying to scream something, but all that came out of his throat sounded more like a groan. Emily approached, saw the man, and recoiled. He was homeless, dressed in rags. He seemed ageless, with very long, dirty hair, a grizzled beard, and the smell confirmed that he was a man who had hit rock bottom in society. Maybe he's drunk, Emily thought doubtfully, but she immediately realized she was trying to find a reason not to approach. She immediately felt ashamed. After all, she was a doctor, and it was clear that he needed medical help. "Sir, are you okay? Do you need any help?" she asked, sitting down next to the homeless man. He looked at her with eyes full of pain and despair and just groaned again, clutching his stomach. "I'm a doctor. Let me examine you," Emily said softly, touching the man with her hand. The calm voice and the kindness she had long forgotten made her freeze. Emily placed her hand on his abdomen and pressed a few times. Immediately, she said, "You need an ambulance." Emily dialed the emergency number for the hospital and requested an ambulance. "But you need to call an ambulance from the free municipal hospital. Our hospital won't accept this patient. It's an expensive and reputable hospital," the receptionist said. "The man needs urgent surgery. He might not make it to another hospital. Send an ambulance now," Emily ordered. The receptionist couldn't disobey the commanding voice of the surgeon. Soon, paramedics were rushing down the park path with a stretcher. When they saw the man, they were confused. "Emily, are you sure we can take him to our hospital?" one of the paramedics asked. "Do you suggest we leave him here?" she replied indignantly. "But he's a homeless man, and we work at an expensive hospital," the paramedic continued. "First and foremost, he's a human being. Carefully lift him and place him on the stretcher," Emily said firmly. The paramedics just shrugged and did as the doctor instructed. Everyone in the emergency room was also in shock. The nurses turned pale. Even the janitors were astonished. Jackson, the attending physician, said he wouldn't perform the surgery. "I'm not going near that homeless man," he said. "I can do it myself," Emily responded, ordering the nurses. "Okay, girls, prepare the operating room. We're going to take care of this homeless man." "But where are they going to take him?" she asked. "He'll be transferred to another hospital," Jackson replied. "But it's more than an hour away," and he will obviously worsen if he makes such a trip in this condition. He could die on the way, Emily said, giving him a cold look. So you think we should treat all the homeless, Emily? You're in a top-class hospital where rich people and even millionaires come. He's dirty, he smells, he might have some infection, Jackson said indignantly. A good cleaning of the operating room solves all problems, Emily responded, as she led the homeless man inside the room. The nurses hesitated a bit, but they followed Emily. They knew she was right, but what would the chief doctor say? Mr. Edward had already left, but he would find out later anyway. Girls, I take full responsibility, Emily said, seeing the doubt in the nurse's eyes. Hurry up, wash him, and prepare everything for surgery. The old anesthesiologist, Mr. William, didn't say a word. He was a man of old habits, just like everyone else at the operating table. He appreciated Emily's attitude and tried not to think about the chief doctor's reaction. But he had no doubt that Mr. Edward would make a scene. The operation was successful, although with difficulties. Emily, you made the right decision. If he had been sent to another hospital, he would have already died, Mr. William told her. Yes, that's exactly what I've been trying to tell everyone, Emily replied. But be ready to be scolded by Mr. Edward, the anesthesiologist warned. But why? Mr. Edward isn't human? I think he'll understand, she said. First of all, he's a businessman. Who's going to pay for this bomb? He doesn't even have an identity, Mr. William reminded her. Jesus, he'll only stay in our hospital for a few days. Then he'll be taken to the municipal hospital, she said. She was very naive, but she was sure that the chief doctor would understand her. Emily returned home only after midnight. She had already forgotten about the bath. She just quickly washed her face, went to bed, and collapsed on the pillow, falling into a deep sleep. In the morning, a phone call woke her up. It was the chief doctor of the hospital, yelling on the phone that Emily had created unsanitary conditions and violated regulations. What am I supposed to do now? Quarantine the hospital? Mr. Edward shouted. Why? We did all the tests, even a chest x-ray on that man. There's nothing wrong with him. He's healthy, Mr. Edward. He would have died if we hadn't operated, Emily calmly replied. But why do you care? Is he your father, brother, husband, or friend? That homeless man has been dead to society for a long time. A man like that has no place in the world, the chief doctor said. Mr. Edward, sorry, but your reasoning isn't that of a doctor, Emily responded. You dare speak to the chief doctor like that? You're fired. We'll deliver the dismissal papers, and you can forget about your salary and your labor rights, because they will cover the hospital's losses, the chief doctor shouted. What kind of losses? Emily asked, her hands trembling. The chief doctor hung up the phone. Emily was beside herself after the conversation. She didn't even notice the tears streaming down her face. She just stood by the window as the tears rolled down her cheeks. Honey, are you crying? Her mother approached slowly. Who were you talking to? It was the chief doctor, Emily said, wiping away her tears. Mom, I've been fired. Then she told her the whole story. Her mother listened and just shook her head. My God, what a difficult time we're living in. He thinks you did the wrong thing? Her mother asked. Mom, all that matters to people like Mr. Edward is status and money. Human life has no value to him, Emily replied. That's okay, dear, don't worry. You did the right thing. I'm sure someone in heaven is watching everything that's happening. It will all come back to you tenfold, her mother said, hugging Emily. I hope so, but I'm unemployed now. How will we survive? I'll look for a new job, but I think Mr. Edward will make sure I'm blacklisted by hospitals. In that case, I won't be able to get a job at any hospital. Well, whatever. You could be a pharmacist. They make good money, her mother suggested. Mom, I only know how to perform surgeries. I'm used to saving people, not selling medicine. But maybe you're right. We'll see, Emily replied. Meanwhile, Mr. Edward was already calling other hospitals, telling the chief doctors not to hire Emily under any circumstances. Then there was a knock on his office door. A worried assistant entered. Mr. Edward, we have an inspection today, his secretary said nervously. I just received a call from a friend. She's a secretary at the Ministry of Health. She warned me that they're coming for an unscheduled inspection. I can't believe it, Mr. Edward shouted. This is the last thing I need. Have they removed that homeless man? We're waiting for an ambulance, the assistant replied. When will it arrive? The man asked irritably. He dialed the phone number of the head of the therapeutic department, shouted, and ordered them to remove the homeless man from the hospital. I don't care if you throw him under a bush. A health ministry inspection is on the way, and the homeless man here isn't registered, hasn't been fully examined, doesn't have an identity. Take him to the other side of the park and let the municipal hospital ambulance pick him up from there, the chief doctor ordered. But it's cold outside. It's autumn, the assistant replied. It's not winter yet. You can cover him with a blanket, the chief doctor advised. The nurses took the patient on a stretcher to the exit when the people from the Ministry of Health appeared at the entrance. They had already passed by, but one man took an interest and followed them. Where exactly are you taking the patient? And where's the ambulance? The inspector asked. It should be here by now, Mr. Edward replied, smiling. We performed an emergency operation on the patient. It was successful, and now we're transferring him to another hospital for further treatment. The man from the Ministry of Health turned and looked out the window. He saw that the ambulance had indeed stopped. He passed by the patient, but suddenly looked at his face and froze. Dad? The man exclaimed, running to the stretcher. Is it you? Everyone looked confused. The man's colleague walked up to the stretcher as well. Nathan, you must be mistaken, he said. Then he looked at the man and choked. Mr. Phillip, is it you? The homeless man on the stretcher just looked at them, confused, but kept his eyes on Nathan. They knew each other, yet something had happened that left the man confused, and now he couldn't remember where he knew that young man from. But the man called him Dad, so this must be his son. Dad, do you recognize me? Nathan asked, looking at the familiar facial features. He couldn't believe that the father they had been searching for over the past 2 years, having lost hope of finding him alive, was lying in front of him on a stretcher. He was thin, with a beard and hair that had grown almost to his shoulders. This happened more than a year ago. Mr. Phillip had just celebrated his 65th retirement birthday. He owned a large medical equipment business and wanted his son to leave his position at the Ministry of Health and join the business. But Nathan was stubborn, saying he liked his job and that business wasn't for him. This saddened Mr. Phillip greatly. Who would run the business then? He had a slightly older stepson, but Paul was frivolous and would quickly ruin everything. However, there was no choice. Mr. Phillip signed a power of attorney for him and began teaching the essentials to his stepson little by little. Then Mr. Phillip was attacked. He was driving his car when another car cut him off. Some thugs got out of the vehicle and hit him on the head. He only remembered falling into the river along with the car. He managed to get out of the sinking car and then woke up on the shore. His head hurt. He could barely feel his arms and legs, and most importantly, he couldn't remember anything. 2 homeless people were warming themselves by a fire on the beach. Mr. Phillip went to them. They saw an old man with a bloody head and offered to help. They wanted to take him home, but he couldn't remember where to go. The homeless people didn't want to go to the police with him, so they just took him into their company. That's how Mr. Phillip became homeless, without memory and without a past. The police told Phillip's relatives that they found the car in the river, but not the body. However, the river current is strong, so they could search for years and not find anything. Nathan didn't believe his father was dead and continued looking for him. Despite being in the same city, they always walked on different streets and never met. Paul, the stepson, quickly assumed the role of head of the company and began running it his way. But he did it in such a way that the company was on the brink of bankruptcy. Nathan was furious because his brother had almost bankrupted their father's business. How would they explain this to their father when he returned? People don't come back to life after death, Paul said, smiling. But Mr. Phillip was back. Yes, it was him on the stretcher. Nathan immediately ordered that his father be taken to a room and ensured that he received the best care. No one would oppose him. The chief doctor was now giving orders on what to do and how to do it. Nathan had no idea where they wanted to take his father before. He had forgotten about it, concerned with something else, how to recover his father's memory. It was clear that he had amnesia, perhaps permanently. But then he heard 2 nurses talking. He was standing in the ward, and the girls were talking in the hallway. We were sure he was a homeless man, one of them said. Mr. Edward is doing his best to please him now, but he still fired Emily because she saved a human life. Exactly, I feel sorry for the girl. There are few doctors as talented as Emily, the other nurse replied. But there will always be injustice. Then maybe we should tell the man from the Ministry of Health. He should know who saved his father and who ended up being fired because of it, the nurse suggested to her colleague. Oh no, Mr. Edward will punish us for that, the other nurse said. Nathan appeared behind the door. Excuse me, girls, but I heard everything, he said bluntly. Tell me what really happened. The nurse blushed and was nervous at first, but Nathan could fire them too if he wanted to. Out of fear, they didn't keep the secret. They told him how they found Nathan's father, how Emily operated on him without listening to anyone's nonsense, and how the chief doctor yelled when he fired her. They also told him that Mr. Edward wanted to throw the patient out on the street so that the health ministry inspectors wouldn't see the homeless man without an identity in the hospital. After hearing them, Nathan went to the chief doctor's office. The doctor was happy the inspection would never happen, and he could relax. The fact that the homeless man was the inspector's father, he thought, might even be beneficial to him. He was ready to boast about how he saved an old man in his hospital. Yes, they wanted to transfer the patient to another hospital, but everything was within protocol. He didn't expect the staff to rat him out, but everyone was tired of his arrogance and bad temper. You don't need to worry, Mr. Edwards said, smiling when he saw Nathan at his office door. Your father is in one of the best hospitals. I'll make sure he gets the best treatment. I don't doubt it, Nathan replied, sitting down in front of the chief doctor and looking him in the eyes. Because now you know who his son is. But before that, you wanted to throw him out on the street like a stray dog. What are you talking about? You're mistaken, Mr. Edwards said nervously. You also fired the girl who saved my father, Nathan continued. She wanted to resign. The chief doctor lied. Liar. I know the truth. Go to that girl now and convince her to come here, Nathan ordered. Understood. The chief doctor replied, feeling sick, and ran out of the office, leaving Nathan alone. When Emily saw the chief doctor at her apartment threshold, she was confused. Had he decided not to send the dismissal papers, but to bring the documents himself? Emily, forget everything I told you. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Let's go to the hospital. The son of that old man you operated on is waiting for you there. You did a great job. It turned out he was the father of one of the Ministry of Health executives. The executive's father? What was he doing on the street? Emily wondered. It's a complicated story. I think the police will handle it now, the chief doctor said. Emily hesitated, but she loved her job. She had to swallow her pride and went to the hospital with Mr. Edward. Nathan, seeing the young surgeon, was surprised. She was so young and wasn't afraid to stand up to the boss. That was very brave. Go back to work. No one will fire you again. Mr. Edward realized his mistake, Nathan said. The chief doctor nodded his head, embarrassed. Emily could barely contain her laughter, as it was the first time Mr. Edward looked so pathetic. Several months passed, and Mr. Phillip was discharged. Emily was still working at the hospital, and everyone forgot about the incident. Then, news spread through the city. The police discovered that Mr. Phillip's stepson, Paul, was responsible for the attempt on his life. He had ordered the hit on his stepfather. He couldn't wait to take over his business, so he decided to speed up the process. Now he's in prison. Mr. Phillip regained his memory, but didn't return to business. Instead, a peaceful old age awaited him alongside his loving son. Later, Paul was granted parole only because Nathan hired a good lawyer at his father's request, who didn't want his stepson to be imprisoned, as it would ruin his life. After the trial, Paul moved to another city and had no further contact with the family. How could he? The chief doctor asked when he learned the details. How could a human being do such a thing? His colleagues listened and just nodded, but then they smiled. Mr. Edward wasn't someone who had the right to talk about honor and morality. Later, there was an inspection at the hospital. They found out that the chief doctor had been embezzling state funds. All the funds provided by the state for the hospital went into Mr. Edward's pocket. He was tried and ended up on probation as well. Now, he no longer talks about honor and morality, and he was suspended from the medical profession. Emily is still working as a surgeon, but now, after a day of work, she doesn't rush home to her mother but to a date. Yes, she's dating Nathan, and they're getting married soon. The man is a bit older than Emily, but that age difference is nothing because love knows no boundaries. So, did you like the story? We appreciate your company. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below what you thought of the story. See you next time.